The Tribunal, all rise.
Good afternoon. We are starting our afternoon session on press freedom in Turkey, and we will start with the presentation of his report by Philippe Leruth. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. Madame the President, members of this tribunal, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving the opportunity to speak here. And as a preamble, I would like to say first, because it's a critic I received several times in the past, that my work to draft this report and my presentation are certainly not anti-Turkish. I consider Turkish is a very important country which deserves a true democratic regime, and I have the greatest admiration for the many Turks, and particularly the many Turkish journalists who are fighting tirelessly for their rights. And second, I would like to briefly introduce myself to you, not to show off, but to explain why I was asked to draft this report and why I was so busy with press freedom in Turkey for many years. My name is Philippe Leruth. I was for more than 4 decades a journalist in Belgium, and at the same time, I was for more than a quarter of a century busy with the defense of rights of journalists at Belgian level first. I was for 10 years president of the Belgian journalists. Then at a European level, I was for 9 years vice president of the European Federation of Journalists. And at last, I was for 3 years president of the International Federation of Journalists. The European and International Federation of Journalists are federations of journalist unions and associations, and 4 Turkish journalist unions belong to both. The TGS, Türkiye Gazeteciler Sendikası, the TGC, Türkiye Gazeteciler Cemiyeti, the GCD, Gazeteciler Cemiyeti Derneği, and Disk Bazin is Sendikası. In this context, I was confronted very early on with the problem of violation of press freedom in Turkey. As soon as in July 2001, as president of the Association of Professional Journalists in Belgium, I was contacted by a young Belgian woman of Turkish origin about the situation of a professional Turkish journalist, by that time her brother-in-law. Zeynel Abidin Kızılalçıprak was sentenced in first instance and on appeal to 16 months in prison and a huge fine of 1.6 billion Turkish pounds for separatist propaganda. His crime was that as the head of a publishing house, he had published a booklet containing the memoirs of a young Turkish soldier serving in 1986 in the Kurdish part of Turkey. I then contacted the Belgian Foreign Minister, Mr. Louis Michel, who happens to be the father of Charles Michel, the present president of the European Council, and I asked him to send a protest to his Turkish counterpart, whom he was due to meet in the following weeks. And Mr. Michel confirmed me later on that he had expressed the concerns of the Belgian authorities about Mr. Kızılalçıprak's fate and press freedom in Turkey. Mr. Kızılalçıprak was never imprisoned. He first went in exile in Germany, and after several years he returned to Turkey, where he was not imprisoned. His case nevertheless reached the European Court of Human Rights, which on October 2003, ruled in his favor and condemned Turkey for violating Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights. As this case shows us, press freedom has been regularly violated in Turkey since the creation of the modern republic, and especially during the periods of military dictatorship, this freedom was particularly restricted. Some sensitive topics, as the Armenian and Kurdish questions, have always been very delicate to handle for journalists in Turkey. But now the time has come to wonder whether the lack of respect for press freedom has become a fundamental marker of Turkey's legal and political landscape or not, and whether the state of press freedom has deteriorated since Mr. Recep Tayyip Erdogan took office, first as Prime Minister in 2003, then as President in 2014, and particularly after the attempt coup on 15 July 2016. And to analyze this situation, two questions were asked. The first one, can Turkey currently be considered a country within which a sufficient degree of press freedom and freedom of expression is guaranteed so it can follow the standards of a functioning democracy? The second one, can the decisions taken by the Turkish government still be considered as a reaction to the attempt coup, or do they need to be evaluated as a way to destroy the voices and or organizations critical of the government? Turkey has international and national legal obligations to fulfill. Like many other countries, it signed and accepted the Human Rights Declaration of the United Nations on 6 April 1949. Freedom of expression is among the rights proclaimed in this declaration. Turkey further signed and affirmed the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, as well as the European Convention of Human Rights. Article 10 of the European Convention of Human Rights regulates freedom of expression. Article 10.1 stipulates that everyone has the right to freedom of expression. This right shall include freedom to hold opinions and to receive and impart information and ideas without interference by public authority and regardless of frontiers. This article shall not prevent states from requiring the licensing of broadcasting, television, or cinema enterprises. Article 10.2 adds that the exercise of these freedoms, since it carries with it duties and responsibilities, may be subject to such formalities, conditions, restrictions, or penalties as are prescribed by law and are necessary in a democratic society in the interest of national security, territorial integrity, or public safety, for the prevention of disorder or crime, for the protection of health or morals, for the protection of the reputation or rights of others, for preventing the disclosure of information received in confidence, or for maintaining the authority and impartiality of the judiciary. Turkey is also signatory to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights of 1966. Article 19 of this covenant entitles everyone has the freedom of expression, including the freedom to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas of all kinds. And the Constitution of the Republic of Turkey, besides, guarantees freedom of thought and opinion, Article 25, freedom of expression and dissemination of thoughts and opinions, Article 26, press freedom and inadmissibility of censorship, Article 28, and unacceptability of confiscation of printing houses and their annexes on grounds of having been used in a crime, Article 30. The jurisprudence of the European Court of Human Rights is clear that press freedom and freedom of expression are of fundamental importance for a fully functioning democratic society. In line with Article 10.2, journalists carry evidently responsibilities. They must fulfill their journalistic duty, taking into account some legal restrictions, such as the protection of underages, their ethical codes, and the good practices of their profession. But as an integral part of a functioning democracy, they also enjoy, therefore, a greater protection. For instance, they have the right not to disclose their sources of information. The European Court of Human Rights expressed it in the Handicide against UK arrest on 7 December 1976, which reads, I quote, "Freedom of expression is one of the basic conditions for its progress and for the development of every man. Subject to paragraph 2 of Article 10, it is application not only to information or ideas that are favorably received or regarded as inoffensive or as a matter of indifference, but also to those that offend, shock, or disturb the state or any sector of the population." Richard Handicide had, as a publisher, published a book, The Little Red Book, that was considered by that as obscene by the British government. The European Court of Human Rights rarely accepts national decisions that limit press freedom and freedom of expression, because political discussions must be widespread in a functioning democracy. It appears clearly in the Castells judgment back on 26 March 1992, and this case has clear implications for the current state of freedom of press and expression in Turkey. Mr. Castells was a Basque lawyer and a senator for Herri Batasuna, a political movement in favor of Basque independence. He had written an article in a newspaper stating that a lot of Basque killings remain unsolved, and stated that everyone knew that extreme right-wing paramilitary groups were responsible for those killings. He added that the fact there were no judicial prosecutions was not only the responsibility of the government, but it was also impossible to think that these paramilitary groups could have acted without the knowledge and support of the government, and he was subsequently convicted for insulting state institutions. The Spanish government stressed that freedom of expression was not absolute, but carried with its duties and responsibilities. Mr. Castells, it added, had insulted a democratic government in order to destabilize it in a very sensitive, indeed critical period for Spain, namely shortly after the adoption of the democratic constitution. But the European Court of Human Rights didn't accept this argumentation. I quote, "The limits of permissible criticism are wider with regard to the government than in relation to a private citizen or even a politician. In a democratic system, the actions or omissions of the government must be subject to the close scrutiny not only of the legislative and judicial authorities, but also of the press and public opinion." In a more recent arrest, Mehmet Hasan Altan versus Turkey on 20 March 2018, the European Court of Human Rights stated again that it was, I quote, prepared to take into account the circumstances surrounding the cases brought before it, in particular the difficulties facing Turkey in the aftermath of the attempted military coup. However, the court considers that one of the principal characteristics of democracy is the possibility it offers of resolving problems through public debate. In the court's view, even in a state of emergency, which is, as the Constitutional Court noted, a legal regime whose aim is to restore the normal regime by guaranteeing fundamental rights, the contracting states must bear in mind that any measures taken should seek to protect the democratic order from the threats to it, and every effort must be made to safeguard the values of a democratic society, such as pluralism, tolerance, and broad-mindedness. Since 2000, the European Court has been seized of 164 cases relating to freedom of expression and involving Turkish journalists and or media. And it condemned Turkey in 154 of these cases, which is in 93.90% of the cases. In the early 2000s, 7 cases were struck off of the list following compensatory agreements between the Turkish state and the complainants. But this practice subsequently disappeared, and it can be observed that the years 2005, 2006, 2007, 2010, and 2014 register particularly higher number of cases being decided upon in Strasbourg. According to data from the European Court of Human Rights regarding its legal work in 2018, Turkey breached Article 10 of the European Convention of Human Rights regarding the protection of freedom of expression in 40 court cases. As it stands, Turkey has been delivered the highest numbers of sentences in trials concerning freedom of expression cases at the European Court of Human Rights. Many of the cases that came in front of the court relate to the legal framework restriction or deliberate misinterpretation of the Turkish Penal Code and the Prevention of Terrorism Act. After Mr. Erdogan came to power back in 2004, there were limited improvements in human rights protection in Turkey, but problems regarding the press freedom have never been addressed seriously. The Turkish state's policy of denial of ethnic or linguistic minorities threatened mostly Kurdish or Armenian journalists. An emblematic case that illustrates this repression is the case of Hrant of Firat Dink, a Turkish Armenian journalist and writer. Between 7 November 2003 and 17 November 2004, he wrote 8 articles devoted to the identity of Turkish citizens of Armenian origin. And in his articles, he stated the identity of the Armenians was too heavily built on the desire to see the Armenian genocide recognized by the Turks. At a certain moment, the prefect of Istanbul informed Dink that if he continued to publish articles of this kind, he could not guarantee his security. Dink was prosecuted and finally condemned to 6-month detention in 2006 and was later murdered by a young Turkish nationalist in Istanbul on 19 January 2007 in front of the offices of his bilingual weekly newspaper, Agos. He had been awarded the 2006 Oxfam Novy Pen Prize for Freedom of Expression. On 25 July 2011, Ögün Samast, his killer, was sentenced to 22 years imprisonment for premeditated murder and illegal possession of a firearm by the Istanbul Children's Criminal Court. Initially, His lawyers stated that the police forces were informed about the plan to kill Ding and even were helping to organize it. The prosecution against a large number of police officers, however, did not lead to any indictment or conviction. The European Court of Human Rights condemned Turkey for not guaranteeing the security and the life of Hrant Dink. But gradually, the repression extended to left-wing journalists, extreme left-wing journalists, nationalist or so-called Kemalist journalists, and investigative journalists. And an important event in this evolution was the Ergenekon case. Ergenekon was the name of an alleged criminal network that was said to associate with high-ranking officers of the army and the gendarmerie, extreme right-wing and national left-wing activists, mafia groups, academics, and journalists that were allegedly preparing to overthrow the government. Between June 2007 and November 2009, some 300 people, including journalists, were arrested and 194 prosecuted in various capacities in this context. In his opening speech delivered on 10 January 2011 in anticipation of the International Law Congress 2012 organized by the Ankara Bar Association, Metin Feyzioglu, the president of the Ankara Bar Association, stated, I quote, "We no longer have freedom of press in Turkey. Tens of journalists who expressed their thoughts were taken under custody in open-ended inquiries. The newspapers, televisions, radios are forced to implement self-censor. Implementations of tax audits, penal inquiries, and civilian authorities put pressure on the press and media. Local press and media whose screams are not heard in Ankara or Istanbul is left to the following predicament: obey or perish. In fact, there is no freedom of expression in a country where there is no freedom of press." End of quote. Nedim Sener and Ahmet Sik, two investigative journalists of a high level, very critical towards the government, were criticizing the Ergenekon case as an attempt at the leading party, with the help of members of the Gülen movement in the judiciary, to shut down the opposition against the government. Both were arrested on 3 March 2011 and spent over a year in prison when they were released on 12 March 2012. Worse still, the investigation never reached the trial stage. And if you allow me, when I visited myself Istanbul in 2011 to witness a court case involving journalists, even the taxi driver who brought me back to the Atatürk airport told me he was shocked by the detention of Ahmet Sik and Nedim Sener. Barış Terkoglu and Barış Pelivan, working for the Oda TV website, were released on 14 September 2012 after 578 days in detention. Their trial in the Ergenekon case for revealing that the prosecutor in charge of the case had had lunch with the president of the court never reached its conclusion. Others suffered a less favorable fate. On 2 November 2013, Turkish-Dutch journalist writer Füsun Erdogan and journalists Bahraim Namaz, Sedat Senoglu, Ibrahim Çiçek, Ziya Ulusoy, and Arif Çelebi were sentenced to life imprisonment for membership to a terrorist organization. The founder of Özgür Radio, Füsun Erdogan, was arrested on September 12, 2006 and prosecuted on 296 charges, including that of being a member of an illegal organization, the Marxist-Leninist Communist Party of Turkey. Released from prison pending her appeal trial after nearly 8 years in prison, Füsun Erdogan found refuge in the Netherlands. In 2010, the European Journalists Federation held its general meeting in Istanbul, on the invitation of her Turkish member unions, because that year 44 journalists were detained in Turkey. The following year, in 2011, more than 100 journalists were detained, and by the end of 2012, Turkey held 80 journalists in jail, and this number fluctuated in the following years. On 10 October 2012, in its report to the European Parliament and Council on Turkey's admission for membership to the European Union, the European Commission wrote, I quote, "The increasing incidence of violations of freedom of expression raised serious concerns, and freedom of the media continued to be further restricted in practice. The increasing tendency to imprison journalists, media workers, and distributors fueled these concerns. High-level government and state officials and the military repeatedly turned publicly against the press and launched court cases. On a number of occasions, journalists have been fired after signing articles openly critical of the government. All of this, combined with the high concentration of the media in industrial conglomerates with interest going far beyond the free circulation of information and ideas, has a chilling effect and limits freedom of expression in practice, while making self-censorship a common phenomenon in the Turkish media." The attempt coup on the 9 from 15 to 16 July 2016 and the declaration of a state of emergency on 20 July 2016 gave rise to a campaign of increased repression for which journalists and the media were largely victims, among others, including lawyers, trade unionists, academics, magistrates, etc. To be recalled, Mustafa Kambas, a photojournalist for the Turkish daily Yeni Safak, was killed during the attempted coup. In the early hours of Saturday, 16 July, Turkish soldiers who attempted to overthrow the government seized control of several newsrooms, including the Ankara studios of the state broadcaster TRT, Turkish Radio and Television. They forced news anchor Tijen Karash to read a televised statement at gunpoint. Tijen Karash and the members of the newsroom were held hostages for hours and were threatened. Soldiers also took over Istanbul offices of Dogan Media Center, which houses several media outlets, including Hürriyet daily newspaper, the English language Hürriyet Daily News, and the private television stations CNN Türk and Kanal D, holding several journalists and other staff in the building hostages for part of the night, while several journalists were attacked during the clashes. In Istanbul, Selçuk Samiloglu, a photojournalist for Hürriyet Associated Press, was attacked and assaulted by civilians protesting against the coup. In the following days, weeks, and months, in addition to the traditional targets, so-called Gülenist journalists and media outlets were targeted. The Gülen movement, named after its exiled leader, the Turkish scholar Fethullah Gülen, is accused by the Turkish authorities of organizing the 15 July attempted coup and of having infiltrated the entire Turkish state apparatus. It is what Nedim Sener and Ahmet Sik had written 5 years earlier, and the reason why they had been detained. And Ahmet Sik was nevertheless detained again on 29 December 2016 and held in solitary confinement in Metris prison until 2 January 2017. He was only released on appeal on 9 March 2018. One possible motive for its detention is the investigation work he had produced in between on corruption cases involving AKP members, the ruling party's members. By the end of 2016, 178 media outlets, including news agencies, newspapers, and television channels, were closed by executive decrees. A further 30 publishers were closed down and their books banned. The total number of books banned through those closures reached the thousands, and people apprehended while in acquisition of books, magazines, and newspapers faced prison sentences. State of emergencies decrees closed 19 labor unions, one of which was Ufuk Habersen, one of the largest media workers' union, and membership to Ufuk Habersen was recognized by the Supreme Court of Appeals as evidence of collaboration with a terror organization. According to Reporters Without Borders, the numbers of journalists detained only in the first year of the state of emergency surpassed 100. Other organizations gave much larger figures, with Free Journalists Initiative claiming that 187 journalists were under arrest by the end of July 2018. Those discrepancies among numbers given by different organizations underlined a more dangerous trend of churn in Turkish jails and lack of information about the fate of journalists in the country. By the time this report was prepared, the Free Journalist Initiative's number was 154, and for RSS, Reporter Without Borders, 34. A further 167 journalists were under search warrant and had to flee Turkey to escape arrest, according to the Stockholm Center for Freedom database. On 10 and 11 March 2017, the Venice Commission, which has a tradition of balanced and well-thought opinions, adopted an opinion on the measures provided in the recent emergency decree laws with respect to freedom of the media. And the Commission criticized the Turkish government's statement that these measures were necessary to fight against terrorism in the country. I quote, "Many official interlocutors whom the delegation of the Venice Commission met in Ankara argued that the measures taken by the authorities had nothing to do with freedom of expression because the action was taken in the fight against terrorism. To the great regret of the Venice Commission, such rhetoric reflects profound misapprehensions of the concept of free speech. The existence of any potential threat represented by the media outlets at issue should be demonstrated with reference to some specific facts, for example, be inferred from the content of the specific previous publication of the media outlet concerned. The Venice Commission previously observed that mass dismissals of public servants, especially in the army and police, may be legitimate, accepting that public servants have a duty of loyalty toward the state. However, unlike public servants, the journalists, newspapers, TV stations, etc., have no such duty. Quite the contrary, one of the journalistic virtues is to keep a critical attitude towards the authorities and the politicians. Due to the role of the media as a public watchdog, they enjoy a higher level of protection than any other business. In addition, in assessing the impact of those measures, the authorities should also take into account the potential chilling effect these measures may have on the media market as a whole, and not only on the particular group of journalists or their readers. From 14 to 18 November 2016, the Special Rapporteur on the promotion of protection of the right to freedom of opinion and expression conducted an official visit to Turkey at the invitation of the government. The visit took place just months after the attempt coup from July 2016. The report gives a clear overview of the attacks against the press freedom. I quote, "Media outlets subject to the emergency decrees are not limited to media allegedly affiliated to Gulen. The closure of Cevheri Guven and the book publisher Evrensel and police raid on Cevheri are examples of how the state of emergency has been deployed against critical or independent media outlets and publishers. And the report concluded with a serious warning. The situation of the right to freedom of expression in Turkey is in grave crisis and requires immediate steps for Turkey to be compliant with its obligations under international human rights law. From 11 to 13 September 2019, a joint international press mission composed of the International Press Institute, Article 19, the European Federation of Journalists, the Committee to Protect Journalists, PEN International, Norwegian PEN, Reporters Without Borders, and the European Center for Press and Media Freedom visited Turkey. And their mission concluded, central to this crisis are the 100 plus journalists behind bars and the hundreds more facing prosecution on terrorism-related charges. While the names in jail have fluctuated over the past 3 years, the overall figures have barely declined since a high of over 160, making Turkey out as the undisputed leading jailer for journalists worldwide, a title it has held for almost a decade. Behind those figures lies a story of egregious violations of fundamental rights, with dozens of journalists held on the most serious terrorism-related charges for months, sometimes years, pending trial, in many cases without an official indictment. When their day in court eventually arrives, the prosecution's case invariably hangs on the flimsiest of evidence where legitimate critical journalism has been conflated with terrorist propaganda, part of a campaign to silence opposition voices and close down free speech. The platform to strengthen the protection of journalism and the safety of journalists was created by the Council of Europe on 2 April 2015. This platform includes the international and the European Federation of Journalists, the European Association of Journalists, Reporters Without Borders, Article 19, the International News Safety Institute, the Committee to Protect Journalists, Index on Censorship, the International Press Institute, the Rory Peck Trust, the European Broadcasting Union, PEN International, the European Center for Press and Media Freedom, Free Press Unlimited, and the Open Society Institute. In its annual report 2020, the platform called on the Turkish authorities to stop treating critical journalism as a criminal activity. I quote, "As of 30 December 2019, there were 103 active alerts and 24 resolved alerts on Turkey. These include 91 journalists in detention and 4 impunity cases. 18 new alerts were submitted in 2019. Turkey has not responded to any of the 2019 alerts. The 2019 alerts included incidents of violent attacks on journalists, the expulsions of 4 foreign correspondents, arbitrary arrests during attempts to report on demonstrations in southeastern Turkey, and criminal investigations for criticism of Turkey's incursion into northern Syria. On March 10, 2019, long-term German correspondents Jörg Brase and Thomas Seibert had to leave after the authorities refused to renew their press credentials. Vaguely worded anti-terror laws were also used against foreign journalists and dual nationals. In September 2018, the authorities detained Austrian journalist Max Zirngast at his home in Ankara and charged him with being a member of an unknown leftist terrorist organization based on his writing. He spent 3.5 months in pre-trial detention before being released from jail with a travel ban imposed until the conclusion of the trial. He was eventually acquitted of all charges in September 2019. German-Turkish journalist Deniz Yücel was held for over a year on espionage charges before being released in February 2018. A dozen of foreign journalists were expelled from Turkey following the breakdown of a fragile peace process between the PKK and the Turkish state forces in July 2015. French journalist Olivier Bertrand was deported in November 2016 after being arrested while reporting the Gaziantep province. Italian journalist Gabriele Del Garande was arrested in April 2017 near the Syrian border and deported 3 weeks later. French journalist Mathias Depardon was arrested in May 2017 while taking pictures in Batman province and deported the following month. 2019 saw a significant effort by the Turkish government to convince international partners that is engaging in serious reform of the judicial system. Some elements of a judicial reform package have brought relief to some journalists, in particular the lifting of a ban on journalists sentenced to less than 5 years from appealing to the Supreme Court, a change that has led to the release of a number of defendants pending appeal. However, the package largely fails to address the most significant demands made of Turkey by institutions such as the Venice Commission, including ensuring that journalists are not subject to anti-terror charges based on their writing, and the authorities demonstrate relevant and sufficient reasons for the detention of journalists. Meanwhile, the powers of the Radio and Television High Council, Arte UK, have been extended to online broadcasters, which are now required to apply for expensive licenses. The lack of clarity on what is deemed an online broadcaster means that Arte UK could potentially begin to police critical social media, the platform of the Council of Europe further commented. The mission report of the Joint International Press Freedom Mission to Turkey also devoted an entire section on the regulation of online broadcaster by the Radio and Television High Council, which provides further limitation of digital media, and commented, "A primary concern of the process is that one of the conditions for license is to pass a security check by the National Intelligence Organization and the police, a requirement that is clearly open to misuse." A new bill was approved by the Turkish Parliament on 29 July 2020 on media platforms. This new regulation compels social media companies with over 1 million users a day to have representatives based in Turkey who are Turkish nationals. In case of non-compliance, they might impose fines up to 40 million Turkish lira, approximately 5 million euros, advertising bans, and a reduction of internet bandwidth by up to 90%, effectively blocking access to their platform. Tech companies are forced to store their data locally. This means that it will be easier for the Turkish government to demand that companies hand over data about their customers that could well lead to their prosecution for what they have said or even shared online. Platforms are also obliged to respond to requests to block or remove content within 48 hours or face fines of 5 million Turkish lira, which could increase to 10 million Turkish lira if they fail to respond.
Mr. Leruth, may I just ask you to go to your conclusion?
I conclude.
Because time is flying.
Yes, so I came to the conclusion. The first question was, can Turkey at this stage be considered as a country within which a sufficient degree of freedom of the press and freedom of expression is guaranteed so it can be in compliance with the standards of functioning democracy? And to answer this question, I will consider following elements. Turkey has been condemned for violation of Article 10 of the European Convention of Human Rights 154 times since 2000. This is a significant number of times. The report shows many prosecutions and severe convictions for insult or defamation of the President of the State. The mission report of the Joint International Press Freedom Mission mentioned 12,300 cases from 2014 till 2017. The number of journalists kept in pre-trial or convicted for long-term imprisonment, making Turkey one of the undisputed leading jailers of journalists worldwide, is again clearly not in accordance with human rights guarantees. Closing down around 200 media outlets, having blocked more than 400,000 websites, and organizing a strict system of authorization for classical radio and for online broadcasters, again, is in clear contradiction with human rights, in particular Article 10. And against this background, it can be concluded that Turkey cannot currently be considered as a country within which a sufficient degree of freedom of the press and freedom of expression is guaranteed. Turkey is not acting in compliance with the standard of a functioning democracy, because a functioning democracy without an effective guaranteed freedom of press is impossible. Second question, can the decisions taken by the Turkish government still be considered as a reaction linked to the coup, or need they to be evaluated as a way to destroy the voices and or organization critical of the government in Turkey? The failed coup and the fight against terrorism have been the main justification of the part of the Turkish government and the different international rapporteurs and before the European Court of Human Rights. But this justification cannot serve valid grounds for all the violations committed by the Turkish governments. First, the examples given in the report show that the repression did not start after the failed coup. The procedures against Dink and the procedures against Cevheri, just to name those two, started ways before. Also, the timing and targeting of a long list of journalists in the following days shows that these journalists had been on the Turkish government's list well before the failed coup. The failed coup was therefore an excellent opportunity to execute this long-established plan. As the Venice Commission stated, if the government's intention was to react against a threat of terrorism or to avoid a new coup to occur, then other methods should have been used. Taking into account all these elements, the ultimate yet unfortunate conclusion of the report is that the violations of press freedom committed by the Turkish government can no longer be considered a reaction linked to the coup or aiming at fighting political violence and terrorism. The clear purpose is to silence all critical voices in Turkey as much as possible, whereby prosecution and long-term imprisonment are used as frequent method to reach that goal. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Leruth. It's true that freedom of expression is the basis of democracy. It's a condition of democracy. And the European Court of Human Rights repeat that time and again. I think it's important to go back to the basic. So now the floor is open to the judges to put some questions. I will start with you, Judge Bayens.
Thank you, Madam President, and many thanks for this excellent report. You describe in your report a wide variety of measures that directly or indirectly are affecting or seem to be affecting freedom of the press in Turkey. And it definitely stands out the use of criminal law, now the criminalization and judicial harassment against journalists and media workers. But have you also, in your research and in your work for over these years on Turkey, found significant cases of violence against journalists? That's an aspect that is mentioned. You mentioned some examples, but could you give us a sense of, how much of a problem is actual violence against journalists? That would be one question, and then maybe we can go to the other question. Thank you.
Thank you. As a matter of fact, the only facts of direct violence we could witness was during the attempt coup, because the population in Turkey generally, well, when I mean Turkey, I never went into rural Turkey, but I can say in Istanbul, Ankara, also in the Kurdish region, the population generally supports journalists. And when I mentioned the taxi driver who brought me after Nedim Sener and Ahmed Sheikh were detained, was for me significant. It was just enough that I said I was a journalist that immediately he told me spontaneously about this. The main problems the Turkish journalists face is the hostility of the state authorities through repression and especially since the attempt coup.
Can I? Yes, I do have. I have two more, if I may. The second one is, as a journalist, and again, based on your research on the situation in Turkey, and also your conclusion that the current state of affairs in Turkey is not compliant with its international obligations. But can you elaborate on what you think is the impact on society of these, and what the level of self-censorship currently amongst journalists is, and what the impact in society you can see?
As I said, not only journalists were targeted after the attempt coup. Trade unionists, academics, magistrates, lawyers were imprisoned and subject to different judicial actions. I remember attending a meeting in Brussels by a magistrate who wanted to react, and we thought it was useful to join forces to try to get a positive result, but eventually we couldn't. Very generally, I would say when you have a colleague who is arrested because he wrote about a topic, you must be very courageous to take over the same topic and develop it. And I must say, in Turkey, I know many courageous journalists, some journalists who were detained and came out of prison with a case still open, which means with a sword of Damocles above their heads. They resume their activity and further are very critical of the authorities. But as the president of the Ankara Bar Association said, we know the situation of well-known journalists in Istanbul or Ankara, of the well-known media, but local media whose screams are not heard, as he said, in Ankara or Istanbul, may indeed obey or perish.
Thank you. And the final question is, you mentioned in your report this term or concept that has been developed under the emergency decrees, the iltisak, coherence as a form of terrorist activity. You have it on on your report when you're talking about some of the findings of the joint mission, international press freedom mission to Turkey. Could you elaborate or explain a little bit more about that and how it's being used against journalists and media workers?
Could you be a bit more precise?
You make reference in your report, and it's okay. We can also, it's in your written report. But I found very interesting and concerning the use of these. It says Turkey invented iltisak, and in parentheses coherence, as a form of terrorist activity. Accordingly, coherence, like moving as conjoined to one another, voluntary submitting, facing same direction, interpreting circumstances from the same viewpoint, etc. I mean, it's a long description, falls into that definition. But what it was not very clear to me is how it was being applied to the press.
As a matter of fact, this kind of reasoning is repeatedly used but I would say in some dossiers. And for instance, more generally, it's a phenomenon that's not only Turkish. We call it criminalization of journalistic activities. We would take what a journalist writes or says, we take a piece of this, and we we can derive from this that he or she is in favor of a terrorist movement or is a member of a terrorist organization and so on.
Judge van der Westhuizen, yeah, we have the floor.
Small question about a small part of your report, paragraph 12 or section 12 on page 265, insult of the president and of the state. I see that the penal code criminalizes insulting the president and the state. In these days of elections, yesterday in Canada, soon in Germany, we heard presidential candidate Biden calling President Trump a clown, perhaps justifiably. And then you mentioned that 12,300 cases, or actually you take it from the Joint International Press Freedom Mission report. What kind of examples do we have? What may one not say about the president, and for that matter also the state, with 12,300 cases filed under Articles 299 and 301 of the Penal Code? Do you have any examples?
I unfortunately don't read the Turkish press, but it's also a comparison what happens in other democracy. In our democracy, I mean, take France, for instance, or our countries, or United Kingdom. You mentioned the United States or Canada. You cannot imagine a head of state or head of government suing a journalist for insult or defamation unless you accuse him of wrongdoings and so. But if you criticize his action or her action very sharply, you will never get such a process. It doesn't make part of the penal code.
I understand.
You know? And in Turkey, this is still a penal offense, which is the difference. I could, I'm not a journalist anymore, but I could always be sued for defamation on civil and ask for civil right, but not from a politician. That's not thinkable.
I understand the private law. I understand that it can be defamation if I say the president has a certain sickness or whatever. But if I say the president is an idiot on economic issues, or something like that, which would very often be a valid comment in many countries. Okay, I'm just wondering when is somebody charged with this offense? If you say the president is ugly, the president is stupid, the president should not be president, I think I will be a better president. And how does one insult the state? The state, you say Turkey is a police state, or when is it an insult?
No. But the fact is that this high number of cases mentioned in the report was astonishing, because never, in no place, you would say the prime minister is an idiot or doesn't know anything in economics. You will never be sued as a journalist for this. Maybe the prime minister won't talk to you anymore, I could understand. But in Turkey, there were indeed penal prosecutions. That's not compliant with Article 10, once again.
It's your turn.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. You told us that some foreign journalists have been arrested and detained in Turkish jails. You mentioned the case of an Austrian and an Italian journalist. My question is the following. Have these detentions and arrests have created a reaction by the respective states of these journalists, the states to whom they belong, at the diplomatic level against Turkey? And if yes, what impact have this reaction had on your Turkish authorities?
I couldn't say if all states protested. I know that Germany protested. I think the two mentioned journalists could return to Turkey afterwards, indeed. And there was indeed a protest by not only the journalist associations and so, but and anyhow, I know at least in Germany, but I'm think in France and Italy there was also they expressed their discontent about this because once again, you know, when you work as a journalist in a foreign country, you have to receive a press accreditation, but normally it's going automatically. If you are a professional journalist, you receive the accreditation. So the very fact they received it, they were deprived of it was already an offensive act, and the expulsion, of course, more clearly. And indeed, there were reactions.
So I suppose exactly the same answer, because Judge Bianco has exactly the same question. So the same answer, okay?
Yeah.
If you agree. Okay. Thank you very much. I think no other question. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for your intervention. It will be food for thought for the continuing of our work, and thank you very much for this collaboration. Now I think we have a coffee break. Yes, we have a coffee break for half an hour, and after the coffee break we have 2 witnesses, and the third one will be on camera. So we have seen that on your program. So we have 2 here in the hearing room, but the third one is in a camera. It means that the audience cannot attend to it, and we will express to you the reason for that. So thank you very much, and see you at 4 here for witness Meltem Oktay, and then Cevheri Guven.
At 4.
4, I say at 4. No. Okay, so we resume at 4. Thank you.
All rise.
Okay, now we are reaching the second part of the freedom of press session with witnesses. We will have three witnesses altogether, but 2 in the public hearing and the third one in camera. So first of all, I will call Mrs. Meltem Oktay. Good afternoon. You have the floor. And thank you for being with us.
Hello. I would also like to relate my regards to everyone. I'm sorry, I'm a bit excited and nervous. Normal. Evet. Yes, so my name is Meltem Oktay. I'm a journalist. And I used to work at Dicle News Agency, which was headquartered in Diyarbakir in 2013. I started to work as a journalist. I was working at Dicle News Agency in 2013. I started to work as a journalist. And at that period of time, in Turkey, we were going through a solution process between the Kurdish politics and the Turkish state. There was a solution process and negotiations were ongoing, and this process evolved to the resolution or solution process. In such an environment, I started to work as a journalist, and as of the end of 2014 and the beginning of 2015, this process started to deteriorate. once again the war process took over. And against the Kurdish politics, there were political genocide operations that were initiated. Many people were detained and they were arrested. Along with that, in Kurdish cities and cities in Kurdistan, self-government some self-government actions were proclaimed because people were saying that they wanted to manage their cities, their provinces themselves. In many cities, self-governments were proclaimed. This included Nusaybin, Yüksekova, Cizre, Silopi, and several other provinces in the southeast part of Turkey. And after the proclamation of self-government, and the pressure and oppression towards the Kurdish politics and the oppressions and detentions and arrests increased, and there were attacks against this self-government act. The demand to have self-government was a democratic demand for rights, and there were serious attacks, and we saw that the arms were now at stake. The weapons were now talking, and one of the places where the self-government was proclaimed was the sub-province of Nusaybin in the province of Mardin, and my news agency, Digital News Agency, sent me to Nusaybin to report on the events that were happening there. In October 2015, as of the end of October 2015, I went to Nusaybin and I was following the occurrences and the events that were unfolding there. In the initial steps, I interviewed the Kurdish youngsters and the civilians who were living there. They were attacked. And we also saw the curfew, which was a practice from the 90s as a state of emergency practice. And this took many days, sometimes 9, 10, sometimes 14 days. There were curfews that were proclaimed. This was not only the case in Nusaybin, but also in Cizre, Yüksekova, and Silopi, which were other provinces and sub-provinces. So such curfews were proclaimed. So this actually means that this was a military operation. Whenever a curfew was declared, there were attacks in that sub-province or province. The forces of the government were attacking neighborhoods, quarters where civilians were residing, and they used to have these long barrel arms. They were opening fire, and the Kurdish youngsters also responded to this. So there was a mutual conflict. I followed the events there. For 6 months, I resided in Nusaybin, and I made news reports based on the events that were unfolding there. There were also some other journalists who were present there from the Turkish media. The majority of the journalists just went there. They just took a superficial photo and then they wrote their news articles. So there wasn't an in-depth news article. But I wanted to go to the area where civilians were living, where the operations were being held, and I stayed there. I lived with those people. Therefore, I was able to relate my news directly from the people. I reached out my microphone directly to the individuals. I started to hear their opinions, emotions. I wanted them to tell me what they thought, what they felt about those operations. I made news reports about this, and I tried to raise their voice and communicate their opinions to the world's public opinion. And this war process continued for about 6 months. 7 times curfew was proclaimed during this period of 6 months. And finally, on the 14th of March in 2016, a curfew was proclaimed again. And we knew that this curfew, and we predicted that this curfew would last very long because we saw similar things happening elsewhere. And this curfew, along with this curfew that was proclaimed on the 14th of March, as you can see in this image, this is how Nusaybin looked like. There were hundreds of thousands of civilian residents living in this sub-province. But as a result of the bombing attacks and all kinds of arms, all kinds of weapons you can think of were used in order to bomb the places inhabited by civilians. Tanks, barrels, A4 devices, mortar pieces, mortar bombs were used in order to destroy and burn to the ground the residence areas of the civilians. Can you show the other image, please? Yes, this is also an image from that sub-province where I worked as a reporter. So why am I telling you all this? Because I was there for 6 months and I made news about all these events in order to communicate it to the public, and I was turned into a target. There were also foreign journalists there. Most of them were detained, and most of them were treated as if they were spies. For example, there were journalists from Der Spiegel, from Newsweek. There were many foreign correspondents and journalists. Most of them were detained. They were taken under custody. And at that period of time, a journalist colleague from Sandika.org, a news site, was taken under custody. I believe this colleague was under custody for 1 day, and they called me afterwards and they told me that my photo was shown to this journalist at the police station, and they asked this journalist about me. They asked this journalist, where is this individual? What is she doing and where is she? And at that time, I understood that I was actually being searched for and something could happen to me. But in spite of that, there were still newsworthy events there, and I felt the need to report on those. I felt this responsibility, so I continued to stay there. After the curfew that was proclaimed on the 14th of March, I went one neighborhood back and I rented a house. And Uğur Akgül, my journalist colleague, also came to live with me there, and we decided to report on this process together. There we were staying in a house. And in this period of time, so this curfew lasted very long. And on the 29th day, so namely on the 12th of April, there was a raid in the house where I was staying. I was at home and I was getting ready to appear on TV to relate the events that were unfolding there. And suddenly, in front of the door, I heard heavy armored vehicle engine sounds, and I immediately looked outside the window and I saw 2 armored vehicles stopped in front of the house. Several special operation officers and police officers came out of the vehicle, and I actually estimated that they were there to take me away. I knew this. And then these special operation officers, around 15 of them were there, and there were 4 or 5 plainclothes officers. They used a ram head to break the door of the house where I was living in. They asked me my identity. When I told them my name, they told me they came to the house because they were looking for me. And they entered in the house. And at that time, my colleague Uğur Akgül was taken to another room by the special operation officers that entered the house. They took me to another room, but I could see Uğur from where I was. And they made him lie on the ground with his face down. And my colleague had actually been operated on his head before, and they battered him with kicks in his head. And at the same time, the special operation officer who was kicking him in the head was saying him, don't stay here, you can go to Kandil or Kamışlı, don't stay in this place. This is what he was telling him. And I was in another room, I was watching this, and a plainclothes officer verbally insulted me, he threatened me, and he uttered some abuses against me, and he said, we still have a lot to do with you, let's go to the police station, I know how to make him talk, etc. He was threatening me, and he was verbally abusing me in this manner. And I would also like to mention, as a side note, that this process during which I had this experience was a process before the coup d'etat, the attempted coup in Turkey. So please also take this into account. So the police officers that came to detain us to our house and these special operation officers, these special operatives, searched our house for about 2 hours. In 2 hours, they seized microphones, 2 computers, 2 cameras, 2 video cameras, 1 notepad, a diary, flash, USB sticks, etc. They seized them as if they were evidence of crime. They considered all of them as evidence of crime, and they put us in the armored vehicle. They took us to the detention center, which is the sub-province police station in Nusaybin. The first time we entered this sub-province police station or police department in Nusaybin, I was taken to another room by 1 male and 1 female police officer. The policewoman took me inside, and there I was stripped, and they searched me. They frisked me. They first unstripped me, and then they frisked me. So I had to go out afterwards, and the policeman told the policewoman, "Did you search her well?" And then she said yes. And then they had eye contact, and the policeman asked her to search me again, and they made me go into the room again. So twice I was subjected to, I was frisked twice, and I was totally stripped. And then we were taken to the police station. So we were under custody for a period of 2 days. So we were in this custodial prison. So once during the interrogation, without my lawyer, they took me out of this custodial prison. They took me to another room, and in this room there were 4 or 5 people who were dressed in civilian clothes. They were policemen, though, and they asked me to sit in front of them, and then they started to talk to me. They told me, "Okay, so you are young, you still have a bright future ahead of you. Help us, work with us. You can guarantee your future. You can rescue your future. You can help your family, etc." So indirectly, they proposed me to become an agent. So I told them that I would never talk, and I was never going to talk. And then they took me back to the custodial prison where I was previously held. There is something I forgot, let me tell you this. During the time when we were being detained, so when the policeman came to raid our house, as soon as we noticed this, I immediately sent a message to the news agency I was working at. I told them, "I am being taken under custody." I think this saved my life. The fact that I sent this message has saved my life. That's what I think. Because when we were under detention at the police station, a police officer told me, "You should pray that there is a news article about you in the press. Otherwise, you wouldn't have imagined what could have happened to you." Indeed, after I sent this message, Dicle News Agency made a report about this, and the Turkish public opinion heard that we were taken under custody in the war zone in Turkey, and nobody knew what would happen to us. So the fact that this became public, this information became public, was very critical, and it was a critical reason why we were actually rescued, because the police officer actually told me personally, "You couldn't have imagined what would have otherwise happened to you if this wasn't heard on the news." So for 2 days we were in custody. On the second day we were prepared to be taken to court. They gave us our shoelaces, everything, etc. We were going to go to court. We were going to be taken to court. And because there was an arsenal that had fallen on the court building, and because of security situation, the court hearing was not held. So we were once again taken back to the custodial prison. The trial was postponed 1 day, but then 1 day later, at a hospital room, as a result of, or just for reason of formality, there was a table where a judge was sitting, and we were heard there. I hadn't given my testimony at the police station. I told them I wanted to give my testimony at the court, so I was taken to court in that room. As I mentioned, they asked me some questions. Did you make these news articles? Did you write these news articles? Did you take photos of the tanks? Did you talk to the youngsters who were fighting there, etc.? These were the questions that they asked me, and I told them, "I'm a journalist. If needed, I would also have an interview with an armed person. If needed, I can also talk to all kinds of people because I'm a journalist." So I was in Nusaybin, and I was at the place where there was newsworthy events, and I also held my microphone to the people who had a gun in their hands. I also talked to the people who were living there, the children who were living there. I made news reports about the thoughts and opinions and feelings of the people who were living there. This is my duty. This is what I have to do. This is my responsibility as a journalist. So this is what I told them. But in spite of that, I was treated as if I was a member of a terrorist organization. And at the court on the 14th of April, I was arrested with the crime of being a member of a terrorist organization and for making propaganda of a terrorist organization. So I was sent to Mardin prison. In Mardin prison, I waited for a while until my indictment was drafted. My indictment was prepared. When I received the indictment, I saw that there were 9 witnesses who gave testimonies about me. One of them was MIT agency, the Turkish intelligence agency agent. And these were Kurdish youngsters that were taken out of the war zone from Nusaybin. And in the indictment, they told me that I was taking photos of the vehicles that were in the operation, the military vehicles in the operation, and that I was disclosing the operational information. So this was presented as evidence. So there was also a hidden or an unidentified witness. So there were 9 witnesses. So they told me that I had news resources who nobody else could avail of, or nobody else had access to the news resources that I had, and this was presented as a crime. And on the 24th of April, I had my first court hearing. So in the first court hearing, 8 out of the witnesses, 8 out of the 9 witnesses, they gave testimonies about me, said they gave these testimonies under torture, that these testimonies were not valid. They told that the accused was a journalist, so they withdrew the other statements. Only the testimony of the MIT, the Turkish intelligence agency officer, was accepted. So there was only one testimony against me. And then I was also still being put on trial as I was detained, and the second hearing was held on the 18th of June. And then, because of the lack of evidence for becoming a terrorist organization, I was released in such a way as to be trial without detention. So 4 months later, I was released. And after I was released, I started to again practice my journalistic activities where I was staying. I started to work once again for a digital news agency. I started to make reports, news reports. And the digital news agency where I was working for was also in such a situation. So there had been this coup attempt when I was being put on trial. Then I was released in the process of coup. And the digital news agency was closed down as a result of the decree in the force of law that was proclaimed after the coup attempt. So I was unemployed. And afterwards, there was a news site that was established, dhaber.net. This was established by the employees of the digital news agency. And I continued to work for the site. In total, only for a few months, I was free. And on the 25th of November, the final decisive hearing was held, and I was acquitted from the crime of being a member of a terrorist organization. And afterwards, because of the crime of making a propaganda about a terrorist organization, I was condemned to 2 years. 1 year of this sentence was decided because I committed this crime by means of, or quote-unquote, by means of news, by means of a press, and also because I use social media. They increased my sentence. So they increased my sentence for 2 years. So in total, I was condemned to 4 years. And only in a period of 15 days, this verdict was approved by the Court of Appeal, which is an intermediary court. So I was being searched as a wanted person. So because I had seen prison, before I had this experience, I didn't want to go back to jail, so I decided to go abroad in this process. And I used my own means, my own possibilities. I traveled to Istanbul, and from there, I used some other means. I tried to escape to Europe. I went to Bulgaria with a group of refugees. I traveled to Bulgaria, and the Bulgarian police officers caught us when we went to Bulgaria, and off the record, or in an unrecorded fashion, they returned us to Turkey. We were also subjected to violence. They took away everything from our phones to the headphones, our money, everything we had. They pillaged all our belongings. And then we were thrown back to the Turkish side from Bulgaria. On the Turkish side, the gendarmerie seized us, and after they took the fingerprints there, they understood that there was a decision of arrest against me. So this was revealed, and I also learned that there was another court case against me, and I was taken to court when I was there. Because of a picture that I had taken in Nusaybin, a separate case was opened against me, a separate procedure was initiated against me, because in this photo, there were children who were holding weapons made of wood in their hands, and I had taken a picture of that. And because of that, I was again accused of making a propaganda of a terrorist organization. I was taken to court. I also gave my testimony there. And then I was sent to Edirne prison because of the fact that there was this decision to arrest me. So for 9 days, I was in Edirne in a solitary cell. And afterwards, I was taken to Gebze prison. This is where I was referred to. And then, in order for the execution of the sentence that I was condemned to, I was in Gebze for 2 years and 7 months in Gebze. And in October in 2019, there was a judicial package that was proclaimed in Turkey. It was also mentioned in the report in the previous session. So for the execution of sentences that were below 5 years, they could be taken to appeal. So you could appeal against those sentences, because you could go to the Court of Cassation from the Court of Appeal, because the Court of Appeal had ratified my case, but then I had a chance to recourse to the Court of Cassation. So my sentence was postponed. So 1 month before the end of the sentence that I was condemned to, I was released from prison. There was only 1 month till the end of my sentence, but I was released. So after I was released, my case was taken to the Court of Cassation. Right now, my case file is still with the Court of Cassation in Turkey. And there was also an annex, an attachment that has been added to my case, and I think it's about 250 pages, approximately. And all of these 250 pages consists of such images that I took in Nusaybin. It's all consisting of such pictures that I took there. So pictures of civilians, pictures of children, images of children that I had taken. So all of these were placed in the file for my legal case. So after I was released, I talked to my lawyer, and my lawyer told me that my freedom was in danger, and my lawyer said that I could also again be arrested if I were to be detained again. So I decided to go abroad once again. I tried to make a second attempt after the second release from prison. So on the 15th of January in 2020, I left Edirne to go to Greece. For 6 or 7 months, I stayed in Greece. Greece was not a secure place for me. Because of that, I crossed 4 countries on foot and I reached Europe. And today I stand here. I've made an asylum application and my application has been accepted. So I have been granted asylum. So only because of the news articles that I wrote, I have been put on trial, and the indictment only mentions the news articles that I wrote. This was the basis for the accusations against me, but this is not something that only I have experienced. Our colleagues can also show it on the video. You can see here All these journalists that you see, I'm also there. Only in that period of time, between 2015 and 2016, from Digital News Agency, 13 correspondents were arrested. These are colleagues from Digital News Agency. 13 of us were arrested. And this wasn't all of it, actually. So far, what we call free press, what we call Kurdish press, many colleagues from these Kurdish news agencies were arrested. Many correspondents, many journalists have been arrested. Most of them have their cases still on trial. Also, today we had a court hearing of 2 journalist colleagues in Turkey. So this is the overall picture in Turkey. I would also like to mention that Nedim Tülfent, a journalist colleague of mine, Nedim Tülfent, was also there. While I was reporting on the war process in Nusaybin, he was in Yüksekova and he was reporting on similar events. He was also taken under custody in that period of time. And while he was being taken under custody, while being taken from Hakkari to Van, he was stopped in an open area in the middle of nowhere. He was stopped by policemen and they put him on gunpoint and he was threatened with death. And this is what he states in his own testimonies. And maybe you also know, in Van, Osman Shivan and Servet Turgut, 2 villagers, were thrown off a helicopter in Van. This is a very recent incident. And 4 journalist colleagues who made news reports of this incident were also arrested for 3 or 4 months just because they reported on this incident where the 2 villagers were thrown off a helicopter. I also want to mention, as I had already mentioned, Digital News Agency was in the opposition because of the news articles, so it was closed with a decree of law. But even before the closure, for 50 times, it was prohibited for access. And then the colleagues opened dihaber.net. This is a website, and it was also banned from access for 16 times. Then it was also closed down with a decree in the force of law. And then our colleagues established Mesopotamia News Agency, and so far 34 times there was a ban of access against this news site. There is also Jin News Agency. It's the only female, all-female news agency in Anatolia, and it was also subjected to a ban for many times. And after Jin was closed down, they used the name Shujin, so they started a new site, and finally their last name is Jin News. So this is the all-female news agency, and they still continue to report in spite of all the oppressions.
Mrs. Oktay, thank you very much for this testimony. So now question time coming from the judges. Shall you start, Judge Bayens? And then Judge Pace.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you.
Online.
Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, pardon.
No problem. Thank you so much for your testimony. I have a couple of questions for you. The first one, which I think I know the answer, but I would still like to ask you, when you were telling us about the time that you moved to, or you were sent to Nusaybin to report on the conflict, you said that there were other journalists and that most of them, or many of them, were only superficially reporting on the developments. Can you explain why, in your opinion, they were not doing a more in-depth coverage of what was going on?
So my personal opinion is that it takes courage to report on these events. Only brave journalists are needed here. And also, you have to defend right-oriented journalism. So you have to defend the journalism that's focused on human rights. The foreign correspondents who were there really covered all these news. They showed great attention. They went to all the neighborhoods. They talked to the civilians. They were a bit more objective in order to report the events to the global public opinion. But unfortunately, we don't have this in Turkey. We have a free press and we have a pro-government press. There is nothing in between. So this pro-government press never ever dealt with those events. They didn't cover these. For example, there is a journalist called Nazlı Çelik. She is a famous journalist. She works for Star TV. She works in the pro-government media and press. And at that time, she went to Nusaybin. She came to Nusaybin, where I was also there, and I was in the neighborhood where the conflicts were occurring. I was only 700 meters away from the conflict. And at the place where I was working, I heard the bullets buzzing above me many times. I actually survived an imminent death. It's just that I'm lucky that I'm standing here in front of you now. But still, I defended people-oriented, right-oriented journalism. So I wanted to be in the thick of in the actual place where the events were unfolding. But Nazlı Çelik was in an armored vehicle, and she was protected by special operation policemen. And she didn't even enter the area where these conflicts were happening. She only was taken. She was given a tour in this armored vehicle, but she still covered the event as if she was in the heat of the event. And then she kept saying the terrorists are being hit, they are being eliminated, the barricades are being closed down, etc. And I was really surprised when I saw her because she was much behind me. She wasn't in the conflict zone. I was there personally. I was covering what was happening there. What she did is actually false news. It's fake news. And this is how the pro-government media works. And in order to gain favor or curry favor with the government, this is how they report on things.
Thank you. If I may ask you another question, and you are a female journalist, and I don't expect you necessarily to respond for all female journalists, but I would be very interested in learning from your perspective if there are particular challenges that female journalists are facing in Turkey. It can be from your own experience or from the experience of other colleagues. If there's any differentiated impact when it comes to female journalists exercising the profession in Turkey.
Yes, of course. It has definitely a different impact on you as a journalist when you're a female journalist. That's the case for all women journalists. When you are on the site where you are reporting on the news, you can be subjected to oppression or abuse. But in Turkish press, there is the following situation. You are double exposed because you are a Kurd and you're also a woman. So you are shown as a target and you are subjected to threats. They never see you as a journalist, but this is an overall situation, an overall attitude towards the Kurdish press. Generally, Kurdish journalists are not considered as journalists. This is also a criticism, actually. The European institutions also see it this way. There is this approach towards the Kurdish press. There are many employees of the Kurdish press outlets or media outlets. They report on many events happening in that region, and they report on this to the whole world. But we are seen as terrorists. And of course, if you're a woman, it occurs even at a higher degree. Personally, as a journalist who was personally in that conflict zone, I also saw many other female colleagues there. So, of course, the war has a much deeper impact on women. That's true.
Can I ask a final question, Madam President? You're now in exile, but are you able to continue your work as a journalist? What is now your current occupation, if we may?
Mm-hmm. Well, for about 1 year, I have been here, so I made an application to obtain asylum, and I took it very quickly. Currently, I'm residing in Switzerland, so I was granted asylum in a short period of time. So I continue to work as a journalist everywhere, also when I was in prison, and also here I still work as a journalist. Even when I was in prison, I was still reporting on things. Maybe it was difficult to report on things, but somehow I found my own ways to get the news out of the prison. And I also continue to work here as a journalist. I really like my profession. I think it's a very honorable profession. I currently work as a volunteer. I work as a voluntary journalist. I work for a media outlet, Medya Haber TV. So I still carry on with my journalistic activities.
Judge Pache, you have the floor now. Yeah. I don't.
Okay, it's my fault. I got used to being muted. Now you can hear me, right?
Problem, we
Okay.
hear you very well.
All right, thank you. Well, I was congratulating Meltem on her testimony and on her, I was saying she has my greatest admiration for her professionalism and courage in those circumstances. You were arrested originally, is it 2015 that you were originally arrested?
12 April 2015, I was taken under custody, and then on the 14th of April in 2015, I was arrested. I'm sorry, she says she's correcting herself. Just a second. 2016. 12 April 2016, and on the 14th of April 2016, so I correct myself, says the speaker, then I was arrested, yes.
Okay. So you are Kurdish, I assume.
Evet. Yes, I'm a Kurd. I'm also Alawite.
What a combination. I was just wondering, your zeal and your persistence is extraordinary, even for a journalist, I must say. And I was wondering whether you ever got any kind of warning or idea before 2016 that your work and the way in which you did your work was possibly creating a risk for you. Did anybody, or did you ever get any indications about what was going to happen?
So you mean before I started to work?
When you were working in Nusaybin already, and when you were obviously engaging in carrying out your work in a war-like situation where you showed us the destruction and the military involvement of the forces there and so on. I was just wondering whether when you were actually detained and then arrested, whether prior to that you had been given to understand that you might be running risks, as it were, whether anybody ever told you that you might get into trouble by your professional activity, or did it just come out of the blue?
Yes, so let me put it this way. Because I'm a Kurd, I'm not very foreign to such incidents. Let me put it clearly. For many generations, we have been living through this situation, through this victimhood. In 1995, my father was arrested because of the same reasons. He was accused of being a member of a terrorist organization. That was the claim. He was tortured. He went on a hunger strike when he was in prison to gain his rights. So, I'm not saying that we take this for granted or we see this as a normal thing as Kurds, but since yesterday I have been listening to many of the testimonies that have, many of the witnesses that have shown their testimonies here, but their victimhood started as of 2016. But the Kurds have been suffering For much longer, ever since the establishment of the Republic of Turkey, we have been suffering this oppression, this arrest, this persecution. And in this period of time, as we went through all these, we also listened to the people from the Gülen congregation who gave testimonies here. So while we were suffering in the hands of the state, these Gülen members were also in the state authorities, actually. So we were victimized by the current victims in the past. So when I started to work for the press, the journalists who were teaching me this profession in the free media outlet already explained to me that there are risks associated when you work for a free media organization. You can be arrested. Things might happen to you. I already knew about this. I also already read about this. I researched into this. Since 1990s in Turkey, hundreds of journalists have been killed. They were lost during custody. They disappeared during custody. They were massacred. We all know about this. It's not new for us. When I started to work in the media, they already told me there are risks associated with this profession, and I still accepted this knowingly. So when you talk about the process in Nusaybin, we should think of it in the whole picture of the solution process, in the whole context of the solution process, the Kurdish problem solution process. It was a new situation. It was a bit of an unexpected situation for us, a new situation for us. But when I went there, I knew that there were many risks, starting with arrest, ranging up to death. And the journalists who were detained, they told me afterwards that the policeman asked them about me when they were taken under custody, and I informed my agency about this. Then my agency told me, please come back. You should leave that zone, otherwise you will be subjected to great risks. You will be arrested. And I knew that this was unavoidable, but in spite of this, I wanted to carry on, because in that area, there was a totally different process. It was a war happening there. It was a war unfolding there. Several civilians, hundreds of civilians were killed. These people were seen as terrorists. When you look at the statements of the prefectorate, they were saying that 2 terrorists were killed in the conflicts that happened. But when you look at the people they called terrorists, for example, Selamettin Yeşilmen, she was a woman, a mother of 7. She was in her house. Just because she opened the door of her house and she was standing in front of her house, she was massacred by the government forces. They proclaimed her as a terrorist. Also, there was another person called Hussein. I don't remember his name, but there was an old uncle, 55 years old, and he was in his pajamas, in slippers. Because there was a bomb exploding outside, he went outside his house, and at that time, he was an armored vehicle, and he was actually killed with a machine gun. And the door that was standing behind him was covered with holes. It had become like a sieve. And I was the person who was the report on this. I had the responsibility to report on this. So I still took all of these into account, and I still dared to report on these events.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you very much indeed. That's it for me. Thank you.
I will give the floor to you and the questions. Yeah.
Ms. Oktay, yes, I also admire the work that you've done and your courage, and I congratulate you that you made it by foot all the way through Europe to here in Switzerland. It must have been physically difficult apart from all the other dangers. My question is very short. What terrorist organization were you accused of being a member? And linked to that, I got a bit confused with the different time periods. How much time, what was your sentence? And don't go again into all the courts and the appeals and so on. That is a bit confusing. But just in practice, how much time did you then spend in jail because of this criminal charge, not the previous detentions? Thank you.
Direct reply.
Yes, PKK terrorist organization, was a terrorist organization for which I was accused of being a member and making a propaganda of. And I was sentenced to 4 years of imprisonment. And I was sent to prison to serve 3/4 of this. And for 4 months I was in Mardin, and the rest I was in Gebze. So it was about, it was almost 3 years. So it was actually 2 years, 11 months. Yeah, almost 3 years, let's say.
Forget the propaganda, but were you a member of PKK? Of course, I'm not saying they're a terrorist organization at all, but were you at least a member, apart now from your news reports? If you're willing to say.
Being a member of a PKK is based on certain criteria. It requires certain criteria, but I have never ever been a member of the PKK. I am currently not a member of the PKK organization. I'm only a journalist, but I also defend the struggle for freedom, the rights of the Kurdish people. That's the reason why I was working for the free media. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this testimony, yes, full of courage. And so we will finish with your testimony and we'll go to another one. Thank you very much indeed.
Ben çok teşekkür ediyorum.
I would like to thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
So now I will call Mr. Cevheri Guven, and I think it's through digital. So you will see him on the online.
İsmim Cevheri Güven, gazeteciyim. Türkiye'de yaşadığım bir kısım hak ihlalleri nedeniyle Türkiye'yi terk etmek zorunda kaldım. Şu an Almanya'da mülteci olarak yaşıyorum. Karşılaştığım hak ihlalleri önce mesleki kariyerimi, daha sonra özgürlüğümü, sonra da hayatımı tehlikeye atan türdendi. Hatta ailemin de hayatını tehlikeye atacak bir boyuta vardı. Benimle ilgili süreç 2013 yılında başladı. 2013 yılının sonunda Tayyip Erdoğan ve hükümeti bir yolsuzluk operasyonuyla karşı karşıya kalmıştı. Ve bunun neticesinde 4 tane bakanın istifa etmek zorunda kaldığı çok büyük bir yolsuzluk operasyonuydu. Bu yolsuzluk operasyonunu Erdoğan ve iktidarı bir darbe olarak adlandırıyordu. Fakat bunun yolsuzluk olduğunu söyleyen gazeteciler bu süreç içerisinde Erdoğan iktidarının baskısı nedeniyle işsiz kaldılar. Ben de bu süreçte işimi kaybetmek durumunda kaldım. Daha sonra 2015 yılında Nokta dergisini çıkardım. Nokta dergisi Türkiye'nin en köklü haber dergilerinden bir tanesiydi. Uzun yıllardır çıkmıyordu ve askerlerin baskısı nedeniyle, dönemin generallerinin baskısı nedeniyle kapatılmış bir dergiydi. 2015 yılında dergiyi çıkarmaya başladıktan sonra bu sefer sivil bir baskı rejimiyle karşı karşıya kaldık. Dergimize sürekli olarak tazminat davaları açıldı, reklam verenlerimiz üzerinde baskı kuruldu ve en sonunda dergimizin 3 tane sayısı peş peşe toplatıldı. Ki Türkiye'de bir dergi toplatma en son 1980 yılındaki junta rejiminde görülmüş, darbe rejiminde görülmüş bir şeydi. Fakat Erdoğan iktidarı ile geri döndü. Ve Nokta dergisi 3 sayısı toplatıldıktan sonra biz 2 Kasım 2015'te ben ve yardımcım Murat Çapan, Erdoğan iktidarının yolsuzluklarını, Erdoğan iktidarının yeniden Kürtlerle süren barış sürecini çökertip yeniden savaş konseptine dönmesi ve bu savaş konseptine dönmeleri nedeniyle çok sayıda sivilin, askerin, PKK'lının hayatını kaybettiği yeni bir savaş ortamının oluşmasını eleştirmemiz nedeniyle, bunu eleştiren bir kapak yayınlamamız nedeniyle 2015 yılının Kasım ayında tutuklandık. Kasım ayının başında ve Silivri cezaevine gönderildik. Cezaevi sürecinde çeşitli hak ihlalleriyle karşılaştık. Örneğin bizi mahkemeden cezaevine kadar götüren polisler cezaevi aracında bize Tayyip Erdoğan'ın seçim marşını, Tayyip Erdoğan'ın partisinin seçim marşını zorla dinlettiler. Cezaevi sürecinde tek kişilik hücrelere konduk. Tamamen tecrit ortamı vardı. Birbirimizle görüşmemiz, başka tutuklularla görüşmemiz, herhangi bir sosyal ortama girmemiz engellendi. Tamamen 24 saatimizi bir hücrenin içerisinde geçirdiğimiz günlerdi. 2 ay böyle tamamen izolasyon ortamı altında cezaevinde tutulduktan sonra serbest bırakıldık mahkeme tarafından. İstanbul 14. Ağır Ceza Mahkemesi tarafından serbest bırakıldık. O zaman Erdoğan rejiminin tüm baskısına rağmen Türkiye'de iyi kötü işleyen bir hukuk sistemi vardı. Daha sonra dergimize yönelik baskılar yine devam etti. Sürekli her yaptığımız haberle ilgili neredeyse şikayetlerde bulunuldu. Ve tabii biz muhalif ve sert bir yayıncılık yapıyorduk. Erdoğan iktidarını her yönden kritik eden bir yayıncılık yapıyorduk. O günlerde medya dünyası o kadar baskı altındaydı ki böyle yayıncılık yapan dergiler, gazetelerin sayısı çok azalmıştı. Ve bunların hepsi de 2016 yılının o Temmuz ayının 15 Temmuz'da gerçekleşen darbe girişimiyle birlikte kapatıldılar. Nokta dergisi de darbe girişiminden hemen sonra Tayyip Erdoğan hükümetinin çıkarttığı bir kanun hükmünde kararnameyle kapatıldı ve bütün mal varlığına, marka hakkına el konuldu. Hemen ardından da ben ve yardımcım Murat Çapan'la ilgili yakalama kararı çıkartıldı tekrar. Tabii o günlerde Türkiye'de çok ağır hak ihlalleri, işkenceler yaşanıyordu ve bunlar medyaya da servis ediliyordu. Erdoğan iktidarı bir korku rejimi kurmak için adeta bu işkencelerin görüntüleri de sergileniyordu. Özellikle askerlere yapılan işkenceler. Bu ortamda tabii ben de teslim olmayı göze alamadım. Çünkü benim de işkence göreceğim, ağır hak ihlalleri göreceğim ve belki de bir daha özgürlüğüme kavuşamayacak derecede uzun yıllar hapsedileceğim açıktı. Ve bir mülteci botuna ailemle, eşim ve 2 çocuğumla bir mülteci botuna binerek ülkeyi terk edip Yunanistan'a geçmek durumunda kaldım. Bu hem eşimin hem çocuklarının hayatını tehlikeye atan bir durumdu. Fakat özgürlüğümün tamamen yok edilmesi, işkence görmem gibi durumlar karşısında mecburen tercih ettiğim bir durumdu. Ben Yunanistan'a geçtikten sonra yardımcım Murat Çapan Türkiye'de yakalandı ve hemen ardından hakkımızda devam eden yargı süreci çok hızlı biçimde ve iktidarın baskısıyla değiştirildi. Önce bizi serbest bırakan mahkeme dağıtıldı. Mahkemenin 3 üyesi hakim o mahkemede görevden alındılar. Yerlerine yeni hakim atandı. Normalde duruşma savcısı hakkımızda beraat istemişti. Fakat duruşma savcısı değiştirilip yeni bir duruşma savcısı atandı. Ve yeni duruşma savcısı hakkımızda 22,5 yıl hapis cezası talep etti. Ve hemen çok hızlı biçimde hakkımızda 22,5 yıl hapis cezası verildi. Şu an yardımcım Murat Çapan Türkiye'de tutuklu ve 22,5 yıl hapiste kalacak. Şu an 5 yıldan fazla süredir, yaklaşık 6 yıldır Türkiye'de tutuklu durumda. Benim hakkımda da yine kesinleşmiş bir 22,5 yıl hapis cezası var. Ardından da yapmaya devam ettiğim haberler nedeniyle de artık sayısını takip edemediğim kadar çok yüzlerce yıl hapis sistemli davalar açılmış durumda. Tabii Yunanistan'a geldikten sonra üzerimizdeki baskı devam etti. 2017'nin sonlarına doğru HDP milletvekili Garo Paylan, Avrupa'da yaşayan gazeteciler ve akademisyenlere yönelik bir suikast timi oluşturulduğunu ve bunun istihbarat örgütü tarafından oluşturulduğunu açıkladı. HDP milletvekilinin açıkladığı bu listede ben de sürekli olarak insan hakları ihlalleriyle ilgili haberler yaptığım için benim de olma ihtimalim oldukça yüksekti. Ve bununla ilgili de duyumlar üzerine Yunanistan'ı terk etmek durumunda kaldım. Yunanistan'da ailemle yaşadığım süre boyunca aynı şekilde Yunan hükümeti tarafından tren garları, otobüs istasyonları, halkın yoğun olduğu meydanlar gibi yerlerden uzak durmamız konusunda uyarılarda bulunuldu. Yani orada da bir güvenlik tehlikesiyle karşı karşıyaydık. Daha sonra Almanya'ya gelmek durumunda kaldım ben bu can güvenliği sorunu nedeniyle. Almanya'ya geldikten sonra da benzer baskılar devam etti. Almanya'da da 21 kişilik bir suikast listesi yayınlandı benim Almanya'da bulunduğum süre boyunca. Ve bu 21 kişilik suikast listesi içerisinde benim de ismim vardı. Tabii burada biz fanatiklere, aynı zamanda Avrupa'da yaşayan fanatiklere de hedef gösterilmiş olduk. Onların eline böyle bir liste verildi. Ve bu listedeki bazı gazeteciler de saldırıya uğradılar. Bu listeyle ilgili ben de Almanya'da polis makamları tarafından çağrılıp uyarıldım. Çeşitli uyarılara maruz kaldım. Dikkatli olmam konusunda. Aynı zamanda başka bir Avrupa ülkesinden bir uyarı aldım. Ülkelerine gelmemem konusunda yapılan bir uyarıydı. Almanya kadar güçlü bir istihbarat ve güvenlik teşkilatları olmadığını, ülkelerine gitmem halinde can güvenliğimi koruyamayacaklarını belirttiler bana. Yani Avrupa'da bulunmuş olmamız da bizi baskıdan kurtarmıyor. Erdoğan'ın uzun kolları buraya kadar devam ediyor. Tabii bu süreç içerisinde abim tutuklandı, cezaevinde kaldı bir süre. Annemle babam gözaltına alınıp bir süre sorgulandılar. Bu tip aileme yönelik baskılar da, Türkiye'deki akrabalarıma yönelik baskılar da devam etti. Fakat bu süreçte ben gazetecilikten kopmamaya gayret ettim. İnsan hakları ihlalleriyle ilgili, Erdoğan rejiminin yolsuzlukları ile ilgili, 15 Temmuz darbesinin şüpheli yönleriyle ilgili çok sayıda haber yayınladım. Ve bu haberlerin hemen hepsiyle ilgili davalar açıldı. Bu yayınladığım haberlerin pek çoğu hakkında erişim engeli kararları getirilerek halka ulaşması engellendi. Ve iktidar medyası tarafından sürekli olarak hedef gösterildim. Bu süreçte sürekli olarak bir terörist olarak damgalanıp, sürekli isminiz terör örgütleriyle anılan ve pek çok farklı terör örgütleriyle anıldı ismim bu süreçte. Sürekli olarak baskı kurup benim halk nezdindeki yaptığım haberlerin güvenilirliğini sarsmak için çeşitli hamleler yapıldı. Fakat gerek YouTube üzerinden, gerek Twitter üzerinden, sosyal medya mecraları üzerinden ve internetten bu tip haberleri yapmaya devam ettim. Yapmaya devam ettikçe de bu baskının şiddeti artıyor. Erdoğan rejiminin uzun kollarının baskısını Avrupa'da da elbette hissediyoruz. Türkiye'de pek çok meslektaşım cezaevinde, tutuklu durumdalar. Tahliyesi geldiği halde tahliye edilmeyen gazeteci arkadaşlarımız var. Ve pek çok gazeteci de yazdığı haberler nedeniyle sürekli olarak gözaltına alınıyor, sürekli olarak baskı hissediyor. Ve özgür gazeteciler, bağımsız gazeteciler, kritik yapan gazetecilerin pek çoğunun işsiz kaldığı bir süreçten geçiyoruz. Ve bunlarda en çok yaşadığımız problem de bağımsız bir yargı mekanizmasının olmaması. Ama mücadelemizi sürdürmeye devam ediyoruz.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Guven. I give you the floor, Judge Bayens. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you very much for your testimony. And I would like to ask you, what charges were brought against you? What exactly, and your colleague as well, who's still in prison? What are the charges that were brought against you and him, if you may?
Öncelikle ben teşekkür ederim. Süreç içerisinde peş peşe değiştirilen suçlamalar var. Öncelikle bizim
Charges kept changing throughout the process. So, yes, first of all, we were charged with insulting the president, and this is a classical charge that is brought against most of the journalists in Turkey. And then I was charged with doing propaganda for a terrorist organization, but I don't know which terrorist organization. Actually, it took us 6 years to learn which terrorist organization's propaganda we were doing, because the prosecutors are also forced to make charges by the government, and the prosecutor facing me was very young. And I said, okay, you're charging me with doing propaganda for a terrorist organization, but please tell me which terrorist organization, because that's how I'll prepare my defense. And the prosecutor replied that he was the one asking the questions here. And so for 6 months, I was unable to learn which terrorist organization's propaganda I was conducting. Finally, after 6 months, I learned that it was for the PKK that I had been doing propaganda. So that's how I defended myself. And then they opened a second lawsuit, and this time I was charged with trying to overturn the Turkish government, with trying to start an armed rebellion. So these very heavy charges. And of course, I was threatened with 25 years in jail faced with these charges. And of course, this creates a huge pressure on you as a journalist. And so, of course, these push you to self-censorship. And then they changed the charges yet again, because in 2015 and in 2016, of course, there was the coup attempt. And after the coup attempt, they added to these charges of the fact that I was doing propaganda. They said that they charged me with being a member of the Gülen movement, of doing propaganda for the Gülen movement. So the punishments kept increasing. And finally, even though they opened the lawsuit against me in 2015, they started charging me about the coup, which took place a year later. And in May 2016, I was charged with trying to overturn the Turkish government, and they gave me 22.5 years. Both I and my assistant were were given 22.5 years. And at the same time, the magazine Nokta, which I was the editor, was said had defended both the Kurds and the Gilan movement. So we were taken to court for Nokta was charged with both sides for defending both the Kurds and the Gilan movement. But from what I gather right now, I think I'm being charged for many terror-related crimes, and I think I've been asked for 60 years in jail.
Judge Pache, would you like to put a question to the witness? I don't think he's hearing me, so I will turn to you. You have
No question.
a question? What do you say? He doesn't have any question. Okay. Judge Malin Verni, do you have a question?
No.
Judge Bianco?
Thank you, Madam President. I have a quick question. Where are the writings, the reports, the articles that you are writing now being published on the internet, or do the Turkish media outlets? Can I continue?
Yes, please.
I was following on.
Wait a minute, I think there's two at the same time.
So do Turkish media outlets publish your pieces, your writings, or not? Thank you.
Şöyle ben
So, in September 2016, I escaped to Greece on a refugee boat, and I never stopped being a journalist. But since the free media has been made to disappear in Turkey, well, of course, I had to continue to publish on the internet. In this framework, other journalists, such as other friends of mine, other exiled journalists, and I came together and created an internet site and a YouTube channel. And then I created my own personal YouTube channel. So now I publish both on the net and I also speak on this YouTube channel. And I publish 2 videos per week on my own personal WebTube channel. And there are millions of people who watch this every week. And at this moment, the Turkish population is very interested in media that is being disseminated in Europe. And the reason for this is that they don't have their own free media in Turkey. It's the only way they can reach independent news is thanks to Turkish journalists publishing from Europe, speaking from Europe. But of course, most of the news that I'm publishing is about human rights violations and on corruption. These are subjects which closely interest the Turkish population. But of course, the news that I publish can't be quoted in Turkey, because to quote a news that I publish in Turkey, be it in writing or vocally, would mean to do propaganda, terrorist propaganda.
Thank you for your testimony. And so we are coming to the end of the public hearing this afternoon. We still have one witness, but in camera. I'm sorry. Cosa? John, I asked him, did he say no?
He does. I don't know if you want.
I'm sorry. John, do you have a question? Judge Pache, do you have a question? Okay, I don't think he didn't appear. So, no, I don't think, because I asked him at the beginning and he said no. So I think it's over. Okay, thank you very much, all of you. Thank you, Philippe Leruth, for your interesting and extensive report. Thank you for Mrs. Oktay, who is still there. Thank you for all of us for collaboration to the work of the court, of this tribunal. It's very important for us to have this witness who can really give a testimony on what happened. So for the audience, we see each other tomorrow. Those who still hope that the Turkish government will show up, Then it's at 9:30. Otherwise, the work starts at 10. So at 9:30, there is a slot foreseen for the tertiary government to intervene if they so wish. But we will start at 10, and then it will be the presentation to be the topic of impunity. So tomorrow we start impunity at 10 and government at 9:30. Voilà, thank you very much. Have a good evening and see you tomorrow. And now
All raised.